Again, I'm Gareth Baldrica-Franklin. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where I study intersections between web and mobile mapping, pedagogy, and place, with a particular emphasis on Indigenous geographies. And I typically try to study these things through sites of design. So let me go full screen here. Okay, so today I'm going to be talking about a project that I've been involved with for a few years that is very near and dear to my heart, called Mapping Teejop. Mapping Teejop is a digital Indigenous walking tour of the UW-Madison campus, and today I'll be talking about the process of this project's creation and my involvement in that process. I want to start by acknowledging where this work is situated. The land in which we know today as Madison, Wisconsin, which is where the UW is located, is the ancestral homeland of the Ho-Chunk people, specifically in a place they know as Teejop, which means 4 lakes. This land was seized by the US government as part of an 1832 treaty, which was part of a series of land seizures and violent removal attempts designed to ethnically cleanse the Ho-Chunk from the state of Wisconsin. It's a testament to Ho-Chunk resistance and persistence that these attempts have failed, and the Ho-Chunk remained and continue to remain in Wisconsin and in Teejop. So today, throughout the UW campus, there is physical evidence of this longer, deeper history, primarily in the form of earthen effigy mounds. These mounds are often shaped like animals or figures from oral tradition. Sometimes they are just geometric shapes. And there used to be tens of thousands of these in southern Wisconsin. Unfortunately, through the process of colonization, through the process of the creation of the city of Madison and the University of Wisconsin, many of these mounds were destroyed. And sometimes these mounds also contained human remains, but not all the time. However, some still do remain, and unfortunately, the ones that do remain are open to continued destruction and desecration. One of them has a sidewalk that bisects it. A couple years ago, there was a soil science student who unknowingly dug into the side of one of these mounds to collect a sample. And so, these things represent kind of institutional failures on multiple levels. Additionally, as is true of many, perhaps all, US universities, there are many settler monuments that are very prominently featured as part of the campus landscape that are factored into broader campus tradition. And at UW, none exemplify this more than this guy here, Abraham Lincoln, sitting on top of Bascom Hill. So Abraham Lincoln, in addition to some other things that he did, facilitated a brutal war against the Dakota people in 1862 in what became Minnesota, which culminated in the largest mass execution in US history, which was signed off by him. Additionally, this statue was donated by a white supremacist news baron in the early 1900s. So a lot of kind of like bad vibes with Abraham Lincoln on Bascom Hill. So this project really emerged from questions relating to these kind of disparate elements of the UW campus. How can we connect students with the deeper Ho-Chunk history of the land while also centering and highlighting continued Indigenous presence, both Ho-Chunk and of other Indigenous students at UW? Additionally, how can we problematize or complicate the more visible settler histories and monuments that are very physically prominent on the UW campus? And as I'll describe, these questions have sort of evolved and expanded over the course of the project. So initially, this project was the idea of a group of Indigenous professors at UW led by Dr. Casey Keeler, who wanted to create a very accessible tool that could guide people through these questions on campus and could be easily integrated into existing course curriculum. This project, in their eyes, would be very sensitive to feedback from the campus native community and would be complementary to a guided Indigenous campus tour that also exists at UW. That is fantastic, but is sort of limited to small groups and is very long. We wanted something that was basically accessible to anyone all the time. And finally, they wanted something that could be used to advocate for change on campus. And this was, in 2021, and around that time, they wanted someone to help implement some of these ideas, which was where I came in. And I was absolutely honored to be brought into this project and really have an opportunity to work through the process of making a map like this and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. So how did we actually do this? What was the kind of step-by-step? We began by picking some sites on campus, emphasizing both Native history and presence, and unpacking the places of campus tradition, as I mentioned. And so 2 examples of this. On the upper right, we have a sculpture by a Ho-Chunk artist who is also a former professor at UW named Truman Lowe. That statue is called Effigy Bird Form, was recently installed. A lot of people pass it every day and maybe don't understand who it was by or what it's about. On the bottom, we have the flag of the Ho-Chunk Nation, which flies occasionally behind the Abraham Lincoln statue on Bascom Hill. And for this particular site, we note that most of the year, when you go there, you will not see a flag flying. It's mostly an empty flagpole. They pull out the flag for only certain occasions. And so for this site, we emphasize the struggle to get this flag flown in the first place, to reaffirm Ho-Chunk sovereignty, and also the performativity of the University of Wisconsin for choosing to just have this be an empty flagpole for most of the year instead of just flying the flag when they could. So once we had those sites picked out, we consulted with some, and as we were doing that, we consulted with some Ho-Chunk students, Molly Pillay and Kendra Greendeer, who were very instrumental in the early stages of the project, one of which who is now a professor at another university. For each site, through our research, our consultation, our collaboration, we compiled short, about 300-word narratives to kind of expand upon the information at each site. Then we worked with a Ho-Chunk language expert named Henning Garvin to get some actual translations of some of the Ho-Chunk words that we wanted to include. Based on this, we created a route connecting each site, and I will talk more about that in a second. So I think that this project is something that offers a very unique set of design implications. And really the main thing that I kept coming back to as I was thinking through this is that this is the design of an experience of place. It's not simply a map. And I also took a lot of inspiration from Dr. Margaret Pierce, and specifically her paper, The Last Piece Is You, which describes how Indigenous cartography, which she understands as part of Indigenous place names, often require direct experience with the landscape to be fully understood. And so here, we wanted to create a relationship between the map and the landscape that had to be experienced to be fully understood. In doing so, we didn't want the map to be overemphasized. We didn't want students to be holding their phones in front of their faces as they're kind of walking through campus. No, we wanted students to actually get some information about their surroundings and then actually take in the information in a physical sense. So that was kind of the main thing. And in order to kind of figure out how to do that, I had to walk this route a bunch. I kind of experimented iteratively with specific orientation between each stop. This is not a navigation tool, so I wasn't looking for the most efficient route between each site. Rather, I wanted a route that emphasizes the sites that we're thinking about following kind of a rough narrative or chronology. This is also a mobile-first design, which has some kind of specific cartographic and interface implications. I designed this with accessibility in mind, and if you were at the NACIS accessibility session last year, you may have seen an early version of this project and provided feedback on it, and if you did, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And finally, this project from its very onset was, one, designed to be sensitive to feedback, so it needed to be easily editable over time, and also we wanted to add new tours to it, which we since have, so it needed to be designed with kind of long-term sustainability or maintenance in mind. Just really quick, some technical details. This was mostly made using open source tools. The simple route plotting and site plotting was all done in QGIS. I made a custom base map in QGIS that I exported using a plugin that is complicated and confusing, and happy to chat more about that after my talk. Could be the subject of its own session here. Doing this allowed me to include some Ho-Chunk place names where they were appropriate. And then I built a boutique web application with Leaflet, HTML, JavaScript, etc. And this is what it looked like with some contrast issues that the accessibility group last year pointed out, although it's particularly washed out on the projector. So the map is on the left. We have the sites. You can't really see the route, but it's there. And when you reach a site, you tap the circle, and it pulls up the little narrative. You have the opportunity to have the story read aloud. We recorded the text for each stop so that if you are blind or low vision, you don't actually have to use a screen reader. You get to hear the voices of the people who created the project. So as soon as we released this, we started our feedback process. And we had kind of two main modes of generating feedback to improve the initial version of the tour. One was a survey that we sent out to classes that we had kind of advertised the project to. And we got hundreds of survey responses, which was excellent and very gratifying because it meant hundreds of people had gone on the tour and were using the tool. So that was amazing. We used the survey primarily to address concerns of like usability, to kind of figure out what was working and what wasn't with the actual design of the app. And then we ran some student focus groups with primarily native students to kind of get more in-depth feedback and kind of assess like what these students wanted out of this. And in doing so, we ended up with some useful kind of suggestions and critique that we've implemented moving forward. And the main one from both sources of feedback was that sites were kind of hard to find. I think that this reflects this idea that we're trying to highlight some of the hidden or minimized histories that through the forces of settler colonialism have actively been minimized visually on campus. And so this is a challenge to think about: how do we draw people to these things? How do we occasionally represent ideas that have no physical corollary? And I don't have like a solid answer for that, but what we tried to do was add some additional directions to the map, tried to make sure that all the photos that we included were kind of the vantage that a student might be standing when they're looking at a particular site. There was concern, particularly from Native students, about the sidewalk that goes over one of the effigy mounds. And we wanted to make sure that there was no chance that we would be guiding students over them, because that is desecration. So we kind of changed up the route to make sure that that wouldn't happen. Additionally, a lot of the Native students in the focus groups talked about how there were plenty of resources on, maybe not plenty, a bunch of resources on campus, but they were all very disparate. And so we've kind of used the site as a repository for resources relevant to Native students, just so they're all in one place. I don't know if anyone really like knows about that, but it's something that we have been adding to over time. And through these iterations, through these feedback sessions, we have kind of upgraded the design of the tour. Again, still a little washed out on the projector, but I'll post the QR code at the end of the session, and you can see it for yourself. Again, I changed up some of the fonts, the typefaces, changed the routes a bit. And yes, this is what it currently looks like. So, as I said, we initially planned one tour with the idea that we would be expanding this over time. We have since released 3 additional tours, and 2 more are going to be released next week. So this is very much an active living project. And as part of my own kind of design research, I am developing a technical and processual toolkit for the creation of similar digital walking tours in the future. This is very much like still a work in progress. I have nothing to show, full stop, at this point. But this is something that is to come. And yeah, with that, I would like to thank you so much for listening. I appreciate your time. And I have time for a few questions. In the very back. Would one of you be willing to be a runner? Thank you.
Where am I going?
Thank you, Jake.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. So I have a question about Indigenous ways of wayfinding or navigating. So on between the sides, the landscape has drastically changed to modern roads and road systems. So I'm wondering whether there's any opportunity to make the middle, like on between, could be also be an experience for people to feel about that kind of distractions and modifications of the landscape.
Yeah, thank you so much. That is a fantastic question and kind of idea. The short answer is yes, the routes are currently designed to create thought about that, and each site kind of ends with a question that students are designed to kind of brainstorm as they move to the next site. But I have been thinking a lot about the way in which these routes can be better designed, and I keep coming back to like trying to engage all of the senses in different ways, and I don't know how to do that. But it's a active thought and process, and I would love to think about it more. So thank you. Any other questions? If not, we're a little ahead of time. Oh, okay, we got one more.
If we have a bit of time, I'm going to use this actually as a plug for you and everyone here. I don't know if any of you have heard of Tribal GIS Conference. It happens every year in Albuquerque. It's a wonderful conference. It's kind of low attendance, and they almost always have time for extra presentations. The ones I've seen today would be perfect, would fit. The past couple years that I've gone have been lots of conversations about returning to Indigenous place names. So I just want to plug that, to keep that in mind, the Tribal GIS Conference. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that's great.
I have a question, Gareth.
Yeah.
Does your application, is it just the UW campus, or are you going elsewhere in Madison?
Yeah, so as of right now, we are just on the campus. The current tours that are coming out next week are of the UW Arboretum, which is technically like campus, but more associated with the city of Madison. We have talked about expanding into Madison proper, though, in the future, because there's a lot to talk about, but we haven't done that yet. Yeah. Okay, do we have another question? I have like a lot of time, so I was pretty quick.
Yeah, no pressure. So you hinted that it's kind of like cartographically difficult to highlight these places that have been historically minimized, right? So what have you come to as like strategies to draw that attention to these places that traditionally are kind of like ignored by Western cartography?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So there's kind of two different types of sites that that exist. So one are sites that have some sort of physical existence that are just small or minimized. So actually I can go back to here. So on the upper right, this tiny plaque commemorates the Black Hawk War, and it is very tiny. And in the spring, it is surrounded by beautiful flowers, which makes it even harder to spot. And so this is an example of something that has a physical existence that we can talk about, that relates to a topic, that is just a question of how do we like better direct people to make sure that they know where it is. The other type of site are things that we want to talk about that don't necessarily have a specific location component or a specific spatial component. And so, for example, for some of the stops that I've been working on recently, one of the things that we're talking about is the emerald ash borer and the destruction and death of so many black ash trees in relation to their effect on basket making. There are no ash trees that we can point people to. And so this becomes a question of how do we represent an absence? Where do we make people stand to think about this? And like, I don't think that there's like a silver bullet solution here. What we did for that particular stop was we have people stand in a little wooded grove, and we say, okay, this is a type of woodland that could have ash trees in it, but doesn't. I don't know if that's perfect, but this is like the real challenge of trying to sort of highlight things that just literally don't have a physical existence.